Hi, I'm John Jessup in the Washington, D.C. CBN News Bureau, joined with Deborah Lipstadt, professor at Emory University. Deborah, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Deborah, you're portrayed in a recently released film called Denial, which is about a libel trial brought against you by a Holocaust denier. So can you take us back to the beginning and maybe set the scene for people who aren't familiar with your story or who've not yet had a chance to see the movie? Why did historian David Irving sue you?
In 1993, I wrote a book called Denying the Holocaust, The Growing Assault on Truth and Memory. And it was an attempt to explore who Holocaust deniers were and what their MO, what their modus operandi was. I didn't think they were a tremendous threat, but I took them seriously enough that I thought they should be exposed and explored. In the book, I devoted a couple of paragraphs to a writer of historical works based in the UK, a man named David Irving, who had become a Holocaust denier. He had always flirted with the far-right extremist wing. He wrote books that always explored how the Nazis were not quite so bad and the Allies were not quite so good, and how the Jews deserved whatever they got to them. That theme prevailed in many of his books. But in 1988, he openly expressed himself as a Holocaust denier, denied the existence of gas chambers, talked about Hitler as the best friend the Jews had in Germany, how Hitler had tried to stop any persecution of the Jews. So in my book, I mentioned that, and I called him a Hitler partisan, who's someone who shaped history to fit his ideological perspective. When the book came out in the United States, very well received, was then bought by Penguin UK. It appeared in the United Kingdom. And once it appeared in the United Kingdom, I was subject to British libel laws because I was considered to, quote unquote, have done business in England. And he sued me for libel there. One more point that might be of interest to your listeners, the British libel law is the mirror image of American libel law. In America, if I say you libeled me or you slandered me, I have to prove that you did that. In England, if I say you libeled me, you as the author of the work is responsible to prove that what you said is true. So the burden of proof was on me.
There's a shift in the burden of proof. Now, the trial took place in London, and you fought against some pretty incredible odds. For example, you weren't allowed to testify on your own behalf, and you denied yourself the opportunity really to speak on your own behalf outside of the courtroom to the press. So can you describe how challenging that period of time was?
I have friends who know me well and family members who describe my keeping silent as an unnatural act, because I'm one of those people who, we sometimes see signs in subways or in public places put up by the government saying, if you see something, say something. I never quite understand why people need to be encouraged to say something. I say it quite naturally. I actually didn't deny myself the right to speak. My lawyers did not want me to speak. My lawyers felt our job was to prove that David Irving was a liar. Our job was to prove was that he twisted evidence. Our job was to prove that he twisted what the document said. And my going into the witness box wouldn't help that. And it was a way of trying to starve him, so to speak, forensically. So, but they said, if you're not in the witness box, don't be talking to the press. So I, a naturally gregarious person, a person whose whole profession is built on speaking, on lecturing, on talking, had to deny myself the right to do that in order to win this case.
And now look at you today. You have a movie that portrays what happened. You're getting...
I never in a million years would have I expected that. What I find particularly gratifying is that the story and the anti-Semitism of the Holocaust deniers and the racism of the Holocaust deniers is being brought to the screen, and this story is being exposed to so many people.
You helped me segue into the next topic. If I'm not mistaken, the trial was about 20 years ago in 1996?
Well, the lawsuit began in 96. But the trial itself was in 2000.
In 2000. But, so that was 16 years ago, but we have people who today still deny the Holocaust happened. Why do you think people still deny that it ever took place?
Well, I think you have to think of the people who deny it as conspiracy theorists. The Earth is flat, the moon landing was in Nevada or Utah, wherever they say it was. 9/11 was an inside job done by the CIA. People who are conspiracy theorists do not respond to logical kinds of arguments and logical evidence. They have an idea, and everything they see is shaped to justify that idea. To ask why they do it is to ask why they act irrationally. They're consumed by either by hate of Jews, hate of the United States, hate of the Allies, or love of Hitler, love of Nazism.
Speaking of the hate of the Jews, we've seen a rise in what looks like anti-Semitism, particularly in Europe. We just had the vote at UNESCO that basically delegitimizes Jewish claims to historical Jewish sites. Can you explain the link between Christians and the support for the Jewish state, and how that dates back to perhaps the Reverend James, I believe it's Parks?
Yes, well, there's a very wonderful story about James Parks. James Parks was a minister in England with a very fine church, but he was also a scholar. And he wrote one of the first books, I think it appeared in 1936, possibly motivated by what was going on in Germany, about the relationship between Jews and the church, and how there had been people in the church who had propagated and furthered anti-Semitism. And it really was it is a powerful book and a powerful self-examination by a committed Christian about this history, that exists in church history. But then it became, and I teach this book. When I teach about anti-Semitism, I use the words, and he's not the only Christian whose books I use in my studies of history of anti-Semitism. But I find his work very powerful, and I've taught it for many years. When Rachel Weisz came on to take this role, I went to visit her in New York and spent a couple of days with her at her home in New York. And at one point, I asked her what her personal family story was. I knew both her parents had been refugees from Nazism. She told me her father had left Budapest as a young boy and come to London, and her mother had been a little girl in Vienna. Her grandfather was active in a Christian Jewish Zionist organization, and her grandmother was not Jewish. But her mother, as a child of mixed marriage, one Jewish parent, one non-Jewish parent, would have been considered Jewish by the Germans and subjected to all the terrible laws that Jews were affected by. 2 weeks before the start of the war, her father was working closely. She said to me, she didn't tell me any names. She just said, my father worked closely with a Christian minister in England who was a Zionist and was active in a Christian Jewish Zionist student organization, and my father knew him. And he sent my mother and my grandmother, her father I think was already in London at that time, an invitation, so to speak, to come for a little vacation in England, which allowed them to get out of Vienna, get out of Austria. Everybody knew it was no vacation, but they needed that. They came to England, and they were taken care of by Minister Parks, the Reverend Parks congregation. They came with nothing. They lived for a while on the grounds of the church until they could get set up. Her mother eventually went on to become a psychotherapist and a very distinguished person, etc. And so Rachel told me this wonderful story, and then she stopped and she said, do you know the name James Parks, that he was the minister? And my mouth fell open, and I said, not only do I know the name, but I teach his book. His book sits on my shelf. She was very touched by that. Fast forward a couple of months, we were getting ready. I was sending things to England for the props people, the property people, to do what they call dress the set, pictures of my family, things from my desk, etc. And the box was about to be closed. There was a little room, and I ran downstairs to my library, and I found the book of James Parks. It's called The Conflict Between Church and Synagogue. And it's signed Deborah Lipstadt, 1974. I bought it when I was in graduate school. I put it in the box with a note, please make sure Rachel sees this book. So she saw it. She was deeply touched by that.
Wow.
And then a few weeks later, she was visiting her mother in Cambridge. Her mother was ill at that time. And she found on her shelf, on her mother's bookshelf, the same book. And she opened it up, and it was signed to Edith. That was her mother's name. Your father loved this book, the Reverend James Parks. So there was a very deep connection through a book. And through someone, a Christian who could not abide anti-Semitism, she and I connected. We connected in more ways, but that was a very personal and profound connection for the two of us.
You two were destined to meet. Speaking of Rachel Weisz, she portrays you in the movie. It has gotten great reviews. What do you hope people take away from this film?
I love that you use the word takeaway and not message, because some people say, what's the message of a film? I think a film with a message is a bad film or it's a documentary. This is neither. I think the takeaway is a number of things. First of all, that there are not two sides to everything, that there's certain facts. Galileo, go back to Galileo, the earth moves, there's certain facts, there's history, Jewish connections to Jerusalem, to Israel, to the land. They're just, Elvis is dead. Elvis is not alive. There's certain, slavery happened. There are things that happened. We can debate why they happened. We can debate how they happened, but not that they happened. That they happened is a fact. I think that's very important. The other takeaway is that you can't fight every battle. This is important. I tell this to my students, Jews, non-Jews, Hindus, Muslims, whatever. You can't fight every battle, but there's certain battles you cannot turn away from. And you have to be prepared to fight those battles. You've got to have the information. You've got to do your homework. But you can't go through life fighting, but there's certain things that you have to stand up for. And if someone, whether it's in the locker room or in the classroom or at a dinner party, makes a clearly prejudicial statement or says something that's completely outrageous, you've got to be willing to challenge them. And sometimes students are afraid, not only students, older people too, but certainly students, younger people, are afraid to challenge because they fear they're going to lose them as a friend. And what I say to my students, if you're going to lose a friend by standing up for the truth, they weren't having as a friend in the first place.
Deborah, it sounds like your students are so fortunate to have you as one of their professors.
I hope so. I hope so.
Well, Deborah Lipstadt, thank you so much for your time. Best wishes to you. And I have to say, I'm looking very forward to seeing the film.
I hope you enjoy it. When you see it, get back in touch and tell me what you think.
Absolutely.